All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really provocative source text titled The Oxfordian Delusion, written by an author using the pseudonym of Phoenix. Now, if you followed the debate over who actually wrote the works of William Shakespeare, you know it gets heated. But this source takes it to a whole other level. It aggressively aims to dismantle the Oxfordian theory. You know, the belief that Edward de Vere wrote the plays. And it goes so far as to label the entire Oxfordian movement an absolute, undeniable delusion. We're going to break down exactly how the author constructs this fiery argument, using the specific claims and evidence they've laid out. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the Oxfordian delusion itself, move on to the 1604 problem, unpack the case for Francis Bacon, dive into some wild ciphers and cover-ups, and wrap up with why this enduring mystery still matters. Part 1. The Oxfordian Delusion. A false suspect? Let's get right into this centuries-old heresy setting the stage here. You already know the ultimate literary mystery, right? What if the Stratford man wasn't the mastermind behind the greatest plays in the English language? The source we're looking at takes it as an absolute given that William Shakespeare was just an illiterate or semi-illiterate frontman. But if not him, then who? That is where the battle lines are really drawn. For decades, tons of skeptics have championed Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. You've heard of the Oxfordian theory. But here is where our source drops a bombshell. It argues this whole movement is built on a massive, self-perpetuating error. The author insists that while Oxfordians rightly spotted the frontman, they tragically latched onto the wrong nobleman, creating what they call the Oxfordian delusion. Just look at the fiery rhetoric here. The author claims Oxfordians willfully bypassed the real culprit, Francis Bacon, out of pure blindness. According to the text, the founders of the Oxfordian movement didn't even bother looking at the overwhelming evidence for Bacon. They just simplistically framed the debate as de Vere versus the Stratford man. Talk about a missed opportunity, right? Moving on to Part 2, the 1604 problem, a fatal flaw. Let's look at the source's most devastating logical takedown of the Earl of Oxford. This timeline perfectly illustrates the historical impossibility our text is hammering on. Edward de Vere dies in June 1604, but wait, according to the source, new Shakespeare plays keep dropping, and older ones are heavily revised with thousands of amendments right up to the 1623 First Folio. The text makes a pretty undeniable point. A guy who died in 1604 literally could not be writing and revising plays for another 19 years. It's just math. So, to make this awkward timeline work, the source argues that Oxfordians are forced to invent these totally fantastical narratives. Since dead men don't edit folios, the text points out that desperate Oxfordians claim contemporaries, even Francis Bacon himself, edited the 1623 folio for Oxford. Why? Supposedly so Bacon could plant ciphers to eventually steal credit from him centuries later? Our source completely dismisses this as pure absurdity, engineered solely to protect a delusion. When you put the claims about both these guys side by side, the contrast is stark. The explainer points out there are 0 theatrical manuscripts, 0 annotated copies, 0 letters about the plays ever found in Edward de Vere's possessions. None. But Francis Bacon? The source claims we have his private notebooks, stuffed with hundreds of parallels to the plays, plus heavily annotated historical source texts. It's kind of a night and day comparison for the author. Okay, Part 3, the case for Bacon, building the mountain. Now that the Oxfordian narrative is under fire, the source builds up its own mastermind. The author of Phoenix goes all in on Sir Francis Bacon. You know him, brilliant philosopher, statesman, father of modern science. Well, this text says he is the true hidden hand. While Oxfordian might brush Bacon off as being way too busy with state affairs, the source insists he actually lived a double life, entirely dedicated to producing these 39 plays to better humankind. And to back this up, the text rolls out a veritable mountain of what it calls smoking gun evidence. We're talking about Bacon's private notebook, The Promise, which supposedly matches hundreds of Shakespearean phrases. Then there's the Northumberland manuscript, which originally bundled Richard II and III right next to Bacon's name. Oh, and Bacon's own hand-annotated 1587 Holinshed's Chronicles, the main source material for the plays. Top that off with claims of over 100 contemporary witnesses, and it is a massive barrage of data aimed right at shattering the Oxfordian delusion. Part 4, Ciphers and Cover-Ups, the Friedman Conspiracy. This is where we escalate from historical documents into some serious cover-up territory. For decades, mainstream scholars have leaned on one specific book to completely shut down the idea that Bacon hid secret messages in the texts.
That book, published in 1957, was by William and Elizabeth Friedman, literally two of the greatest cryptographers of the 20th century. They concluded there were no valid Baconian ciphers in the place. Boom, case closed, right?
Well, not according to our source. The text throws out an absolutely audacious accusation here. It claims the Friedmans were in on a massive deception. Step 1. They deliberately wrote a commissioned book of disinformation to protect the academic Stratfordian myth. But step 2? Knowing the truth that Bacon actually did use ciphers, the Friedmans supposedly used their own tombstone to reveal their true findings to the world.
No way, right? But yes, the text claims these legendary cryptographers designed their final resting place with a hidden message. And when deciphered, it reads exactly this: Francis Bacon is Shakespeare. The author presents this as the ultimate mic drop, proof that even the biggest skeptics knew the truth, and literally took it to their graves, leaving a breadcrumb trail for anyone who knew how to look.
Finally, Part 5, an enduring mystery, why the battle rages on. Let's zoom out and look at the big picture here. What this explainer really nails is the sheer irony of this whole historical debate. The source points out how Oxfordians relentlessly mock mainstream scholars for being blind to the truth about the Stratford guy, but at the exact same time, the author argues these Oxfordians are totally trapped in their own delusion, completely blind to the mountain of evidence pointing right at Francis Bacon. It's this wild cycle where every single side is entirely convinced the others are living in a fancy world. So, as we wrap our heads around these intense arguments, the impossible timelines, and the literal tombstone ciphers, we are left with a pretty profound question. The source firmly believes that crowning Bacon as the true author shatters a massive historical fraud. But for the rest of us, we've got to ask, does the identity of the author actually change the power of the art? Does knowing who physically held the quill alter the absolute genius of Hamlet or Lear? Whatever side you land on, it's questions exactly like this that ensure this mystery isn't going anywhere anytime soon.